Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Gina Zurlo, and I am the co-director of the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary. And I'm thrilled to be a part of the Fuller Missiology Lecture series this year and share with you some of my latest research on women in world Christianity, social norms, and power imbalances. Christianity has always been a majority female religion. After all, history shows that women were the last at the cross and the first at the tomb. In fact, demographers, social scientists, historians, and other scholars have stated for decades that women are more religious than men. The Pew Research Center's Gender Gap in Religion Around the World study claimed that, indeed, Christian women reported higher rates of church attendance, prayer, and religious self-identification than Christian men. Estimating the 19th century missionary movement from the United States as 2/3 female, mission historian Dana Robert described world Christianity as a woman's movement. She asked, what would the study of Christianity in Africa, Asia, and Latin America look like if scholars put women into the center of their research? This presentation draws from my forthcoming book, Women in World Christianity, Building and Sustaining a Global Movement. It is based on my Louisville Institute-funded Women in World Christianity project, which was the first global comprehensive research project to assign a % Christian female to every Christian denomination in every country of the world. Those data are now available in the World Christian Database. However, as this presentation will address, social norms and power imbalances make it extremely difficult to find accurate data related to women in world Christianity. A lack of data and knowledge naturally leads to a lack of acknowledgement and women's contributions, a lack of power, influence, and authority to enact change. So let's take a look at those social norms and power imbalances. Chapter 4 of the 2019 Human Development Report of the United Nations was dedicated to gender inequalities around the world, with several striking findings. First, gender inequality is one of the most persistent inequalities across all countries. The world is not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030, and if current trends continue, it will take 202 years for women to achieve complete economic equality with men. Gender equality in health, education, and economics has been slowing in recent years, and although substantial progress has been made in the last 25 years, there is no place in the world where women have complete equality with men. These statements are not to erase the tremendous achievements women have made in recent years. Women today are the most qualified they have ever been in history. Fewer are dying in childbirth, and more are obtaining secondary education. If this is the case, though, why is the gender gap so persistent? The report highlights two underlying realities: social norms and power imbalances. Social norms dictate men's roles and women's roles in society, as well as set rules of behavior and attitudes that meld communities together. However, biases are widespread throughout social norms. The multidimensional Gender Social Norms Index reported that 86% of women and 90% of men held gender social norm biases. Power imbalances occur when these biased social norms expect men and women to perform certain duties, but women are excluded from the decision-making that limits their opportunities and choices. Social norms are extremely difficult to change. In many cases, people lack the information or knowledge to act or think differently. It is also an issue of what is at stake, particularly for those with more power. As the report states, a social norm will be stickiest when individuals have the most to gain from complying with it and the most to lose from challenging it. In many places around the world, social norms are shifting away from traditional gendered expectations in both public and the private spheres. This is natural with increased women's education, political participation, and control over their own bodies and reproductive rights. These shifts typically push against prevailing beliefs and attitudes about how men and women should act in society. It is beliefs about what people do and what people think other people should do that dictate what happens in the social sphere. At the same time, these beliefs and practices typically serve as active barriers that sustain gender inequalities now and likely into the future. In the first few centuries of Christianity, women gained new opportunities for leadership and public activity in joining churches, and their contributions helped grow Christianity from a fledgling movement into a world religion. However, Christianity, Christians, churches, and Christian theology have also served as active barriers to women's opportunities, and this is difficult to change. While women make up the majority of church members worldwide, they are often prohibited from holding official leadership positions, are excluded from decision-making bodies, and their ministries are considered secondary to the main task of the Sunday morning worship service, where men are generally on public display. Church life, like everything else in the world, is gendered. Men and women experience life differently, and they experience Christianity differently. So let's take a look at some of the data together. Christianity has been the world's largest religion over the last 120 years, representing 35% of the world's population in 1900 and 32% in 2020. By 2050, it is anticipated Christianity could increase to 34%, but that largely depends on birth rates and potential conversions to Christianity in India and China, the world's two largest countries. In this analysis, Christian refers to anyone who self-identifies as such or is in some way affiliated to a Christian congregation or denomination. I'm measuring Christianity by membership, not beliefs or practices. Global Christianity experienced a dramatic change in the 20th century. In 1900, only 18% of all Christians lived in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and Oceania. By 2020, this figure jumped to 67% and is expected to reach 77% by 2050. This is known as Christianity's shift to the global south, where the majority of its adherents live today. Official data, sourced largely from governmental censuses, reveals that in most places, women claim only a slight majority of Christian affiliation over men. However, more localized studies reveal that women's share of congregations is much, much higher, in some cases upwards of 90%. Most Christian denominations collect data of all kinds, including church membership, budgets, attendance, pastors, buildings, ministries, tithes, and so on. However, precious few groups appear to collect data on the gender makeup of their members. This is even the case for churches with robust statistical traditions, like the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, both of whom produce annual statistical reports and have been collecting information on the demographic makeup and activities of their members for decades or centuries. Even for groups like these, gendered membership data are apparently unavailable to the public. With ministry roles so gendered, one would surmise that churches would utterly collapse without women working behind the scenes, yet obtaining seemingly simple data of what share of a denomination is female is apparently unavailable. So if we look at the data together in these tables, this is the result of the Women in World Christianity project, and I'm going to explain the data on the screen, but then we're going to nuance that data. So this table here has every continent and the percent female of that continent, and then the percent Christian female of that continent. For example, Africa as a whole is 50% female, but African Christianity, according to official data, is 52% female. North America is 50.5% female, but North American Christianity is 54% female. So you see not a very wide gap between the data there. Looking at the countries with the most Christians, generally, the countries with the most Christians in the world do report a higher percent female than the general population. You see Nigeria on the list. The Nigerian population is 49.3% female, but Nigerian Christianity is 52.7%. Looking at the countries with the highest percent Christian female, the highest rates that we found in this Women in World Christianity project were 63% female of Christians in Mongolia, Israel, and Estonia. And the last two tables I'll show you, the first is the largest denominations in the world. And in our taxonomy, Catholics are considered a denomination just based on where they are in the world. So you can see the Catholic Church in Brazil is 50% female. The Catholic Church in Mexico, 51% female. Catholic Church in the Philippines, 49.3% female. If you take Catholics out of the equation, you see more Protestant and independent denominations and Orthodox. And you can see here the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia is 53.5% female, and the Church of England in the United Kingdom, 53.8% female. So you might look at these data and think, well, that's not very interesting, is it? In many cases, the percent Christian female mirrors pretty closely the overall overall gender dynamics of the country or continent as a whole. So let's nuance the data and let's look at Africa. One of the most common refrains of African Christianity is that the church is majority female. Women were among the first converts to Christianity, and in most places, women were the drivers of religious life, whether in official leadership capacities or not. Recently, a Nigerian Anglican bishop said to me, "If anyone in Nigeria tells you his church is majority male, he's lying." However, it is extremely difficult to obtain exact numbers for the gender makeup of African churches and denominations. Some examples. On the Catholic Church in Benin, women are very active in the church. For instance, women are the majority in church attendance everywhere. Women do everything. Coming to church, you will find the population of women is greater. Women could be about 80%, while men would be something like 20% in attendance. On Brazilian Pentecostalism in Mozambique, based on fieldwork, it is possible to affirm that nearly 75% of visitors and converts in Brazilian Pentecostal churches in Maputo are women of varying age. On the International Center of Evangelism in Burkina Faso, saying 90% of their church members are women, and this respondent not just makes a quantitative statement, but also a qualitative one to say, and they are far more dynamic than the men. Let's nuance the data in Asia. A similar reality is true here. For example, the Presbyterian Church in Korea Tonghap is one of the largest denominations in South Korea. A study suggested that its membership is 70% female, much higher than what I report in the World Christian Database as 52% female based on official statistics. Another example is the Chinese Catholic Church, which I, again, report as 52% female, but a more on-the-ground report revealed 62% female. In the 1970s and 1980s, the Chinese house church movement was primarily rural and upward of 80% female. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the movement emerged in the cities and among the middle class, and the gender dynamic began to slowly change. More localized studies in the 2000s suggested that women were still 80% of house church leaders and evangelists, and between 70 and 80% of members. It is likely the case that these higher figures are more representative of women's shares of churches in Asia, but unfortunately, this level of detail is just not available for every denomination and every country. From the data that are available, 3 general trends appear to be true. First, surveys tend to report higher percent Christian female than governmental censuses. There are few surveys available for this kind of analysis, but some of the highest percent Christian female figures are from Argentina and the United States, both sourced from surveys, and neither country has a religion question on its census for comparison. In Argentina, the religion survey by the National Scientific and Technical Research Council reported 80% female for evangelical Baptists and 62% female for Pentecostals. For the United States, the Pew Research Center reported 57% female for historically Black Protestants and 54% female for evangelical and mainline Protestants. Second, denominations that fall under the independent category, that is, Christians who do not self-identify as Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, tend to report higher shares of women in their memberships than other traditions, regardless of the source. Examples include the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God in Brazil, Jehovah's Witnesses in Brazil, Church of the Lord Prayer Fellowship in Nigeria, and the Assemblies of God in Zimbabwe. Third, data on church membership routinely illustrates a very wide gap data on church attendance routinely illustrates a very wide gap between men and women's participation, while membership data tends to show more gender parity. That is, both women and men are members of churches, but women participate and attend with a much higher frequency than men. Let's look at some examples, more examples of social norms. A wide diversity of gendered expectations exists within Christian traditions, movements, families, and denominations. Some ordain women, others do not. Some have substantial gender imbalances in their memberships, while others are more equal. Some actively encourage women's public participation, while others prefer women to have more supportive roles. Nevertheless, in all Christian traditions, women are finding ways to live out their vocational callings, make important contributions to the life of the church, and in many contexts are pushing the boundaries for greater equality and influence. So what do women do in churches? Women are preachers and evangelists, ordained and lay, teachers, deaconesses, elders, missionaries. Women run mothers' unions, wives' clubs, ecumenical fellowships, and national chapters of the Young Women's Christian Association and other global entities. Women teach young girls life skills and ensure their education. They are involved in political activism and humanitarian work, speaking out for the oppressed and advocating for equal rights. Some women openly critique social norms in their churches and societies, while some choose to quietly and effectively work within established systems. Women are increasingly elected to honored leadership positions within organizations and denominations. Like the first century of Christianity, women today are leaders of house churches and risk their lives to make disciples. Many have prominent roles in hidden Christian communities in North Africa and the Middle East, where it is illegal or dangerous to be a Christian. The Gender and Congregational Life Survey of the Women in World Christianity Project asked several questions regarding congregational ministries. This chart shows the positions we asked about, such as senior pastor, deacon, administrative assistant, intercessor, janitor, and so on. And we asked respondents if they felt it was more, less, or equally likely for a man or a woman to hold that position. Overall, respondents felt that women and men had generally equal chances to serve in a variety of church positions, such as financial secretary or treasurer, adult Bible teacher, family pastor, or small group leader. However, when we asked who actually holds these positions in their congregations, the gendered dynamics of church life became much more apparent. Even though, for instance, most respondents thought women and men had an equal chance of being an intercessor, most responded that position was held by a woman. Overall, women featured prominently only in the roles of administrative assistant, children's Sunday school teacher, and intercessor. Just 4% responded that women were the senior or head pastor, 8% as overseer, and 14% as family pastor, even though most respondents believed that it was okay for women to serve in pastoral roles. The gap between perception and reality is even more profound looking at responses from the Global South. In Latin America, for example, the only position where women outnumbered men was children's Sunday school teacher. These results indicate that social norms are definitely having an influence on power imbalances in congregational life. Let's look at overcoming power imbalances. Despite the lack of data, consideration, struggles, discrimination, second-class status, and disadvantages Christian women face around the world, many women have exhibited a remarkable ability to rise above the fray, girded by their faith, to enact change. In my book, I give numerous examples of women overcoming social norms and power imbalances in pastoral leadership, missions and evangelism, theological education, gender-based violence, ecological activism, theological scholarship, healthcare, and more. Here, I'd like to focus on one topic: Christian women and peacebuilding. War and conflict have been part of human experience throughout history. In the 20th century, an estimated 231 million people died in or because of warfare worldwide, including starvation, forced labor, exile, and genocide. In just the first few years of the 2020s alone, conflict continues to rage in the Persian Gulf, Western Sahara, Cameroon, Israel, Gaza, the DRC, Yemen, India, Peru, Iran, Afghanistan, Libya, Mali, Nigeria, Ukraine, and Bahrain. Militarism and patriarchy are closely linked, and together reinforce gendered ideologies and attitudes that negatively impact women. Feminist theorist Cynthia Enloe was among the first to suggest that women's oppression is not just a consequence of, but rather a fundamental part of militarism. That is, men place women at the bottom of the social ladder, expecting them to be subservient and submissive in need of protection from brave fighting men. In this way, militarism perpetuates the belief that women are reliant on men for their safety and basic livelihood. A study of 113 countries from 1990 to 2017 found that those with lower levels of income and democracy have strong associations with both militarism and gender inequality. This means poorer countries where women are the most disadvantaged are the countries most likely to be involved in military conflicts. The gendered impacts of war and violence are indisputable. Although wars are typically, though not exclusively, fought by men, it is women and children that disproportionately suffer. During times of war, gender inequalities are exacerbated with decreased social spending, upon which women heavily rely, and increased military spending. Boys are valued more than girls as military necessities. Catherine Marshall and Susan Hayward, experts in global development, policy, gender, and conflict, describe the intersections of peacebuilding, religion, and gender as the following. The term peacebuilding is used increasingly to define the broad, complex, and sustained process of creating, securing, protecting, and consolidating a peaceful order, work that goes far beyond the formal negotiations that seek to end armed conflicts. Peacebuilding overlaps with development and good governance in a greater effort to build successful, prosperous, and resilient societies. It also reaches into social realms where religious institutions hold sway. It affects and is affected by the role of women in society generally and in creating peace specifically. The United Nations Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security was the first resolution to urge UN member states to increase women's participation at all decision-making levels regarding conflict resolution and peace processes, including in appointing more women as representatives and envoys. This affirmed the crucial role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflicts, in peace negotiations, peace building, and humanitarian response. Resolution 1325 was highly generative for women's peace movements and continues to inspire today. Yet, while progress has been made, tremendous gaps still exist. In Afghanistan, for example, women were only 10% of peace talk negotiators in 2020, although we all saw they had the most to lose in the Taliban takeover of 2021. While war, conflict, violence, and tensions have made life very difficult for women around the world, they work behind the scenes, unrecognized, and often without fanfare to help achieve peace, security, and human flourishing. Women of faith, often working invisibly, have pushed back against gendered norms in both religious and secular spaces to show they are not passive victims of violence, but advocates for peace and security. Religious women in peacebuilding often work across barriers, ethnic, gender, and religious. They tend to promote interfaith engagement and understanding in their quest for peace. They encourage religious leaders, both male and female, to engage in the political sphere to solve social problems. They support victims of violence, and they provide education on how to attain and sustain peace. In doing so, these women help raise the profile of their faith communities as actors of positive change in society. Many of these women are routinely dismissed by cultural expectations and particular theological interpretations of Scripture, yet they are inspired by faith to engage in meaningful work. We'll look at some examples from around the world. First is Catholics. Catholic women religious, or sisters, peacebuilders, are largely under the radar from major international organizations, which tend to work with leaders who, in this case, are male clergy. The work of women religious and Catholic laywomen helps expand the witness of the Church and provides social service supports in the form of girls' education, trauma counseling, gender-sensitive training programs for military and other security leaders, and conflict resolution. Women religious are recognized as trustworthy affiliates of the Catholic Church, an institution which is often perceived to transcend race, class, ethnicity, and politics. Yet, women can capitalize on their invisibility since their exclusion from official power structures gives them opportunities unattainable for other leaders. Sisters are non-threatening actors with higher mobility than men in the Catholic hierarchy. Often, Catholic women's peacebuilding efforts are seamlessly connected to other forms of holistic mission and outreach. One example of Catholic peacebuilding is the anti-nuclear movement. In 2012, Sister Megan Rice, who was 82 years old, and two other activists illegally entered a high-security nuclear complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, where they splashed blood on the walls, spray-painted slogans, and lit candles. This was the most extensive security breach in the history of the U.S.'s nuclear complex. After her release from 2 years in prison, she stated, "Good Lord, what would be better than to die in prison for the anti-nuclear cause?" Let's look at the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Peacebuilding in Africa is a major activity of many Christian churches, missions, and NGOs. The continent has suffered substantial ethnic, religious, and political conflict in the 20th and 21st centuries, often driven by the legacy of colonization and the prevalence of corrupt post-independence dictators. The DRC has been in a near constant state of conflict since independence in 1960, including insurgencies, wars, and widespread attacks of various kinds. In ethnic conflicts, it is not uncommon for a rival group to enter a village, destroy the crops, kill or run off the men, and rape the women, as they aim to completely debilitate the community. The DRC was named the rape capital of the world in 2010 by the United Nations Representative for Sexual Violence and Conflict. The country is 95% Christian, and most women are sexual abuse survivors. The stigma, shame, and physical, emotional, mental repercussions of sexual violence are widespread and long-lasting. Gender and religion-conscious peacebuilding is not optional in the Congo. It is essential. Christian women make their own theological and relational contributions to building sustainable peace, especially among local communities. A study of Christian women in peacebuilding in the Kivu region, for example, revealed that women were empowered by the biblical story of Abigail in 1 Samuel 25, the intelligent and beautiful wife of the boorish and wealthy Nabal. Nabal refused to offer food and shelter to David while he was on the run from Saul, insulting him instead. In turn, David vowed to seek bloody revenge on Nabal and his men. Abigail, without permission from her husband, stepped in to ameliorate the situation, providing David and his men food and seeking humble forgiveness on behalf of her husband. David relented and the crisis was averted. Abigail showcased many aspects of peacebuilding and navigating the situation: justice, forgiveness, and humility, while avoiding bloodshed and self-avenging. New feminist contextual readings of scripture help empower African women to speak up and seek justice. Let's go to Liberia. One of the most well-known Christian activists in Africa is Lema Gwobi of Liberia, leader of a non-violent women's interfaith peace movement which hastened the end of the Second Liberian Civil War against dictator Charles Taylor. Christian and Muslim women held protests on the main highway of the Monrovia airport, capturing the attention of the international community. Interfaith activism was critical to address the conflict, given Liberia's religious diversity: Christians, traditional religionists, and Muslims. The 2008 documentary, Pray the Devil Back to Hell, documented the more than 3,000 women who, in their signature white t-shirts, came together to help end the war through grassroots activism, protests, sex strikes, song, and prayer. Gwobi won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 for her advocacy and continues to work at the intersection of gender, religion, and peace. Now to South Asia. South Asia is home to a tremendous amount of religious, ethnic, and linguistic diversity. The region is 54% Hindu, 35% Muslim, 4% Christian, and 3% followers of traditional religions. To be effective, peacekeeping and conflict resolution in this region must be border crossing. Women typically show a greater willingness to work across demographic divides, such as race, class, and religion, in search of peace. Interreligious peacebuilding efforts are particularly important in this region for minority Christians, since they can find support from women of other religions experiencing similar traumas related to war, conflict, and societal upheaval. One example is the Association of War-Affected Women in Sri Lanka, founded by Viska Dharmadasa, which formed in 2000 for mothers of missing soldiers and war widows during the Sri Lankan Civil War. They engage in ritual pilgrimages to Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian sites to draw empowerment and strength from their faith. They were among the initial groups to establish lines of communication with the separatist military group in the north of the country, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. They continue to work with the government and various NGOs on topics such as peacebuilding, interreligious dialogue, pandemic response, and building social cohesion. Their work led to the founding of the Sri Lanka Women Mediators Network, an interfaith group of women, Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian, that provides in-depth training in mediation and conflict resolution. Now on to the Middle East. Peacebuilding in the Arab-Israel conflict and the Palestinian-Israel conflicts is very gendered, with men typically in the public arena and women on the sidelines. Most Israeli and Palestinian men consider the home the appropriate place for women, not the public square. Women's peace activism in this area is at the grassroots level, such as the Israeli movement Women Wage Peace, founded in 2014 after the Gaza War. Women Wage Peace draws inspiration from Leba Gwobi's interfaith activism in Liberia and regularly offers screenings of Pray the Devil Back to Hell to spur women towards peace activism. With more than 44,000 female members, Jews, Arabs, Druze, Bedouins, Christian, secular, religious, rural, urban, they aim to non-violently hasten the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hayam Tanis, an Arab Christian peace activist, has been working with Women Wage Peace in counseling and psychotherapy. She has trained hundreds of Jewish and Arab counselors to encourage education and dialogue between the two sides. In 2004, she helped organize the From Memory to Peace initiative that brought roughly 400 Israeli Arabs and Jews to Auschwitz concentration camps in Poland to address Holocaust denial and encourage empathy for Jewish suffering. Our last example comes from Colombia. In Colombia, which is 95% Christian, conflict began in 1948 with the assassination of presidential candidate Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, launching the decade-long civil war, La Violencia, where at least 200,000 people died, roughly 2% of the country's population. Over a dozen guerrilla insurgencies sprang up to address inequalities related to land, distribution of wealth, and rights of rural populations. By the 1990s, 5 of these had signed peace agreements with the Colombian government. Women represented nearly a quarter of ex-combatants, 40% of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, and between 25 and 33% of the National Liberation Army. Colombian peace negotiations in Havana, Cuba, between 2012 and 2016 resulted in a peaceful resolution to the conflict, but with an unprecedented amount of women's involvement. Although women were not necessarily at the official table, they were influencing the process from all sides. Women's minimal presence as lead negotiators is misleading. At the table, around the table, behind the table, at side tables, women are having their say and shaping the path to peace. Women participated in the process in large numbers via regional workshops and were especially visible in the 2013 National Summit of Women of Peace, where 450 women across regions, politics, and ethnicities came together in Bogota to demand greater representation in peace negotiations. As a result, a specific gender subcommittee was created in 2014 to ensure women and LGBTQ rights were protected in all agreements, the first of its kind in any peace negotiation worldwide. Women in guerrilla groups also participated in peace negotiations. By 2015, 40% of FARC negotiators in Havana were women. In the case of Colombian peace, women across the country, with help from international networks, inserted themselves into the process to ensure their unique needs were being met. Women were on both sides of the negotiating table, guerrilla and governmental, yet came together to show the world that women deserve a seat at the table, and that when they are denied one, they make their own tables. Like all forms of women's activism worldwide, women peacebuilders face many challenges related to religious law, tradition, and local culture. They are caught in between national and international male-led political structures that do not encourage female participation in peace processes. Further, many of their male-led religious communities do not value peacebuilding as a core part of their mission in the world, or they do not value women's public service in this way. The barriers are many for Christian women in this and other kinds of advocacy work, but they draw from their theological traditions for empowerment, and they gain inspiration from biblical women like Abigail to stand up to power. They regularly work across religious divides to address conflicts that impact women, regardless of their theological beliefs or religious belonging. Their victimization does not preclude them from participating in their own healing, nor that of their communities. Despite the social norms and power imbalances that render them invisible, women draw empowerment from their faith traditions and local communities to do the necessary boundary-crossing work to demand justice and peace for themselves, their families, and their nations. So thank you for engaging in the data related to women and world Christianity and seeing examples from Christian women peace builders around the world. And you can contact me at any time with questions about this. Thank you so much.